Welcome to Building Your Legacy, Southern Arizona Estate Planning with Allison Manning.
Welcome to Building Your Legacy in Southern Arizona with attorney Allison Manning. Allison is an estate planning attorney who helps individuals and families across Southern Arizona create clear, practical plans for the future. She works closely with clients on wills, trusts, powers of attorney, and long-term care planning with a focus on making sure those plans actually work when they're needed. I'm Lisa Mosbey, and today we're talking about how divorce and remarriage can affect an estate plan and what steps people should consider to make sure their wishes are still reflected in these documents. Welcome, Allison. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
We create these documents and then they kind of go in a drawer and we forget about it. But why is it so important to revisit an estate plan after a divorce or remarriage?
Yeah, it's very important to revisit your estate planning documents and your estate plan in general after a divorce or remarriage. One, because you likely have, if it's a divorce, you likely have your ex-spouse in your documents, and you may not want your ex-spouse making medical decisions for you or financial decisions for you. You may want to be sure that you've put people in that you now trust as you've gone through that process. Or after a remarriage, you now may want your spouse in there and they wouldn't have been named in your documents. And so not only do we need to update your estate planning documents, we do need to look at beneficiary designations and how assets are titled to make sure that your plan is going to work for you, that the assets are going to go where you want them to go, and that the people in charge of them at a time in your life when you're either incapacitated, ill, or after you pass away, that they're the right people that are in charge of your estate.
And you mentioned beneficiary documents, you mentioned health provisions. What other parts of the estate plan should someone be reviewing after a divorce? Where can we get caught up?
So you'll need to get caught up and review really your whole plan. So if you have a trust plan, it's really important to look at who your successor trustees are and who your beneficiaries are. If you have a will plan, that would be also your beneficiaries under there or your personal representatives for who's in charge. If you have minor children, it's extremely important to designate who you would like to be those guardians of your children. That might change as well for you after a divorce or a remarriage. And then when we look at healthcare documents, that's extremely important because those are people who are going to be making vital life decisions for you at a time when you need to have someone who understands what your needs are, your concerns are, and are able to follow through with your wishes.
And can remarriage change someone's estate planning priorities?
Absolutely. Absolutely. For example, after my remarriage, it was a priority for my new spouse and I to be able to provide for one another, in addition to providing for our children and making that clear that we wanted to leave money, leave an ability to live in our joint home that we have together for the other, but also leave something to our children after one of us passes away at the death of the first spouse so that they're not having to wait around for the survivor of us to pass away before they get some money. So it's extremely important to come together with your new spouse, decide what type of planning you want. Is it that you're going to provide for each other? Are you still providing for minor children? Are you providing for grown children or grandchildren? And do you have separate plans? So maybe both plans might need to be updated and changed.
And Allison, what should people know about updating beneficiary designations after a divorce or remarriage?
So beneficiary designations on life insurance policies, IRAs, 401ks, other retirement, or even bank accounts if you have a payable on death, those should be reviewed and updated to match what your desires are. In a divorce, you might still want your life insurance policy to go to your ex-spouse. That might be a part of the decree or the settlement agreement. So you would need to go back after the divorce and redesignate your spouse or your ex-spouse, I should say, on those documents, because in Arizona, there's a law that protects people when they get a divorce. If they haven't removed their ex-spouse is deemed to predecease them. So it is important on certain assets to make sure that you redesignate if you want your ex-spouse on there. And again, after a remarriage, Oftentimes, spouses have agreed in a second marriage that they are not inheriting certain assets that they may have a right to, and therefore they need to go back, redesignate that it's to go into their trust or go to their children. And so, again, extremely important to look at those designations because your life changes, your goals change after that remarriage or after that divorce, and what you need to provide for will need to be updated. And it's very difficult to navigate all of those different areas that you need to look at on your own. Extremely important to talk with an attorney to find out, have I done everything I'm supposed to provide for myself?
I'd like to talk about how you balance estate planning to help with the needs of the current spouse and children from the previous relationship, because there are some residuals of those previous relationship. Your kids are still part of that relationship in this one. How do you balance all of those needs in an estate plan?
That is one of the most powerful tools of a trust is that you can address many different scenarios and everybody that comes in has a different desire and a different goal. So a trust can provide for a spouse separately and children separately so their assets don't have to you don't have to decide who gets what assets, and that can be very clear in the drafting of your documents. You can provide separate planning tools. So you can leave the children the life insurance policy and leave the spouse the house. And therefore, assets can be completely separated where a new spouse doesn't have to designate or delegate money out to the children. Avoiding any of those tough situations where you're putting your new spouse kind of in a position of against your children will help in their relationship after you're gone. So addressing those now, if you're leaving everything to your new spouse, wonderful, make that clear in the drafting of your documents. If you want certain assets to be retained in a trust, possibly have a co-trustee or held back in such like a life estate for your surviving spouse, then after you pass away, it goes to your children. Those are all things that can be drafted in a well drafted comprehensive plan, and again that really alleviates that confusion or that miscommunication later when you're not there to clarify and to be that one to deliver the news to the children or deliver the news to the spouse. It's very clear in your drafting of your documents.
We've talked a lot about how it can help us. Let's address some of the issues that might come up. What problems can arise if someone never updates their estate plan after divorce? I bet you have a story or two to tell here.
Got a lot of stories, unfortunately. There are many times when people look at their estate plan and they think, okay, it's one and done and I don't need to update it. After a divorce, I've had some people not update their documents. They've left their money to their children, but their ex-spouse was then in charge of their children's money. Unfortunately, they had passed away where their child was still a minor. That is not what they would have wanted to have happen because that was part of the reason they got divorces, their financial issues. Unfortunately, that is who was in charge of the money because the documents were not drafted properly and putting someone else in charge. So that's one of those problems. Another is putting the spouse and the children against each other, where I've had spouses that have passed away. Their new bride was a little bit younger, not much older than their children, and their children had to sit around and wait for their step-parent to pass away before they received the inheritance. And it created some animosity between them at a point where they could have had possibly a continued relationship. And so taking those things into consideration. Now, I always say children aren't entitled to an inheritance or even a new spouse isn't, but it is important to make sure that you address that. When you don't have a plan and you have a blended family and you commingle money, so we possibly have some money that's community property, some money that's separate property, there are certain laws that come into effect that say where your money goes, and it likely is not where you want it to go. Oftentimes, you don't want it necessarily split 50-50 between your new spouse and your children. You might want to be able to provide more for your new spouse or more for your children. And so we usually don't want to leave things to the statutes to decide. So there's many problems that can arise in that scenario.
And Allison, can we prevent all conflicts between new spouses, family members, adult children by using estate planning?
I I wouldn't take credit for preventing all conflicts because,
Yeah.
when we're dealing with people and personality, we may not
Right.
prevent all conflicts, but we really can minimize a lot of miscommunication. Most problems are caused from poorly drafted documents or not understanding the effects of leaving assets a certain way. A lot of times people say, don't worry, my new spouse is going to take care of my kids after I pass away. And I've recently have helped a friend through a situation where that just wasn't the case. There, all the money was left for the new spouse, and unfortunately, there wasn't any money for their minor children. And hopefully, over time, that new spouse might be able to assist and help those minor children. But everything now falls on the mother of those kids, and it's an unfortunate situation. So we do look at things and we try to avoid miscommunication, poorly drafted documents, and the other thing I would recommend is if you anticipate there being a problem, possibly having a family meeting where family members can sit down while you're alive and you can address why you're doing your planning the way you're doing it. So again, there's no surprises. Those surprises are what catch people off guard.
Even with the best estate plan, sometimes there are conflicts. And that was kind of a trick question, all cases. But when there are conflicts, do we end up in litigation over those? Is it arbitration? What is the process? The example that you gave about the mom being fully responsible. Did she have any opportunity or legal grounds to go back to the former spouse's estate and say, we need some contribution or support for the children?
Unfortunately, in that situation, she did not have a legal grounds in Arizona for that because their divorce had been finalized and their assets had been separated. So, unfortunately, she did not. But how do we avoid litigation? People do like to sue. People feel wronged, and it gives them a chance to have their day in court. Most properly drafted documents will have some provisions in it that minimize, if you are a beneficiary, maybe you get some money, but you get it later in time. That no contest provision, if you challenge those documents, you could find yourself now getting nothing. So you do have to be very careful if you raise litigation, if you're standing to all of a sudden lose something that you were entitled to get or possibly get charged with court fees for frivolous claims. So you do have to be very careful with that. But many times we have to go to court to resolve things. We'll have beneficiaries designated on an asset that by operation of law they're not entitled to. But let's say the custodian, the financial institution says, well, the ex-spouse is still named on here. And so now we have to get a court order to declare that we're not liable if we give the money to the children instead of the ex-spouse. So again, we do find ourselves sometimes in court, and that's what the court's there for. But we really could avoid it, and that is the best case scenario. Is let's try to avoid going to court. Get your documents reviewed every couple years after a big life event such as a remarriage or a divorce, a birth of a child or a death. Make sure you're reviewing your documents because your goals in life will definitely change, and you can take control over that by making those changes when appropriate.
Allison, I'm running through my head is the timing of all of this. If you're going through a divorce, is that the time that you start to change your estate planning? Is it immediately after the divorce? Is it just prior to remarriage? How does timing fit into these changes that need to be made?
That's a great question, and it's important. I usually recommend that my clients, when they're going through their divorce, that they update their agents, their powers on their healthcare documents, and they get some things updated. They likely during the process of the divorce are not able to move assets around because of the court order that prevents them from doing that during that process. And so therefore, they will need to come back in after things are final with that divorce and actually move and retitle assets and redo those beneficiary designations. But things should be done before and, of course, after that divorce. And then with remarriage, I encourage clients to come in and actually discuss, is a prenuptial agreement an appropriate tool for them in their remarriage situation? It provides clarity, and it allows for the spouses, the new spouse and my client, to be able to sit down and talk about what their goals are before they get married, which allows us to then draft those documents and solidify what their plan is after they're married. And it really helps the couples clear out what their intentions are and what their understandings of what they desire to do with their money after their marriage and how they tend to treat each other during the marriage.
Allison, this has been jam-packed and great information. Thank you so much for walking us through some of these complicated processes today.
Thanks for having me today.
That's it for today's episode of Building Your Legacy in Southern Arizona with Allison Manning. To learn more or get guidance specific to your situation, you can visit AllisonManningLaw.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who might need it. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.